One of the most important attributes of origami is once we have studied and understood the way paper folds and unfolds, we can apply those patterns to things that are very different from paper. I hope by bringing the tools of mathematics into my origami design that I can then fold something that's beautiful and that's unexpected. My name is Robert Lang, and I'm a physicist and an origami artist. Origami is the Japanese name for the art of folded paper, and most origami is folded from a single sheet of paper with no cuts or tears. I have loved origami my entire life. I pursued it ever since I was a kid. But my study was science and engineering. I worked for NASA doing research on lasers, but throughout that whole time, I had been pursuing origami, developing designs, and writing books. So in 2001, I quit my job to try to make a career out of origami. I've worked on a couple of different folding patterns that were round and would wrap into a cylindrical geometry to fit into a rocket. And I developed an airbag in a car that inflates from a small folded bundle. So whenever an engineer creates something that opens and closes in a controlled way, they can make use of the folding patterns of origami. Over the years, math has allowed me to realize as an artist shapes and creations that I couldn't achieve any other way. Traditional origami was relatively simple. The designs would have taken maybe 20 or 30 steps at most. But today, origami pieces can be so complicated that they can have tens, hundreds, maybe even 1,000 steps. When I'm folding, it's like working with an old friend. It's like dancing with a partner whose moves I know. If I move this way, I know my partner is going to move that way. And so I explore the math, develop the equations, solve the equations, create the folding pattern, and then I find out what it looks like. And as often as not, it is beautiful. For me, the driving force is that there's always something new to try, a new problem, a new subject, a new shape that I didn't think I was able to create before, but now I think I know how to realize it. And each time I solve a problem, you get this wonderful feeling, and you want more of those feelings.
It's 1995. Your word processor is open, and before you press a single key, you make the most important decision of your life. What font do I use? All the usual fonts are too conventional.
There were very few, very casual typefaces that you could use.
You keep scrolling. Too stately, too boring. But then...
it pops out of the menu.
What is this font?
It was so different than everything else.
The way it flows is strange.
It had irregularity about it.
And uniquely flawed.
The stems aren't perfectly straight, they're quite wobbly.
This is the font you want. And in that moment, you and millions of other people click on the button that says Comic Sans. How did a font both loathed and cherished come to dominate the world?
My name is Vincent Linton. I was a typographic engineer at Microsoft. I contributed to lots of fonts like Webdings, Trebuchet, and most notably Comic Sans. So it's all my fault.
To understand Comic Sans, you have to understand its creator. Years before his work at Microsoft, Vincent was working on his undergrad in New York City.
We went to university in the 1980s. I was a quite young, rebellious fine art student.
He'd spend a lot of time in art spaces.
And I'd walk through the galleries of the old Soho and look at paintings and artwork.
To him, what separated good art from bad art was this simple benchmark.
If you didn't notice them, I considered that was bad. And if you did notice, it was good, because at least they made you stop and look. It either shocked you or you really liked it. But if you didn't even notice and you just walked through, it was a disaster.
Vincent would take that philosophy to Microsoft, where he was challenged to make a playful font for a program called Microsoft Bob.
And so I looked at Batman and The Watchmen and pretty much tried to draw on the computer something that looked similar to that, but not copying it. So that's how Comic Sans was made. by just looking at comic books and comic characters.
Not everyone was a fan of the font's quirks.
My boss, Robert Norton, he didn't really like the font, and he thought it should be a bit more typographic. And I argued and said, no, it should be weird. And I thought it stood out, and it wasn't boring typography that's in a school book.
Though the font didn't make it to the release of Microsoft Bob, it was eventually pre-installed on every Macintosh by 1996.
I started to see it when it was in the wild, so to speak. The first one I remember was a neon sign over a store called Fun Stamps. That's when I realized it's going to get used any way anybody wants to use it. And that just snowballed from there.
The font spread like wildfire in ways Vincent didn't even imagine.
When I travel the world and see it on beach towels,
War memorials,
on bread,
street signs,
on everything.
Its overexposure even spurred a group of designers to start an anti-Comic Sans movement.
I thought it was funny. I didn't really find it offensive.
After all these years, Vincent finds himself content with how history will remember him.
And Comic Sans is not one of the better pieces of art, but conceptually it's one of the best things I've ever done. It probably is the best thing I have ever done.
Okay, so everybody knows Michelangelo. Italian, Renaissance, hipster beard. He's made a few things you might have seen. This naked guy, this crazy ceiling, a couple of paintings. But did you also know that he is the mastermind behind one of art's most innovative inventions, paint by number? Way back in the 1500s, Michelangelo was the man, top dog. He had all the popes on speed dial. He was so busy, he used students to help him with his work, and he started pre-numbering sections of his paintings and ceilings so that students could follow the design. See where this is headed? Fast forward to 1949. Dan Robbins was an artist at the Palmer Paint Company in Michigan, and he had an idea. He created painting kits and pre-numbered them, like Michelangelo did, and Paint by Numbers was born. Pretty soon it was hugely popular. Seriously, everybody was doing it. For goodness sakes, J. Edgar Hoover has one hanging in the White House. Today, Dan Robbins, with the help of the rest of us, is probably the most displayed artist in the world. Sorry, Michelangelo.
Whatever.
The year was 1996. It was a different era. Before memes, before viral videos, before anybody argued over whether it's a GIF or a GIF, it's GIF, GIF is peanut butter, there was the dancing baby. What is the dancing baby? Who better to ask than its father, Michael Gerard.
What are you doing here?
The dancing baby, remember?
Oh, the dancing baby. Well, Robert Lurie and I worked together to design the animation. The idea was to show that movement could be programmed and projected onto different characters.
So Autodesk, the company that Michael worked for, started sending around the software to other developers and animators. It was just another demo film until it landed on the LucasArts server. It was there that Ron Lussier tweaked the original file, converted it into a GIF, and sent an email that would change his life forever. So we thought we should ask Ron about his experience. But
Ron Lussier would only talk for $30,000.
Every time the You've Got Mail voice rang,
welcome. You've got mail. File's done. Goodbye.
It was another goddamn dancing baby.
Even I got an email of the goddamn dancing baby.
From that point on, it was unstoppable. Everywhere you looked, there was a dancing baby. On television, on t-shirts, on ties and commercials, even boxers.
Boxers?
Yes, Michael, boxers. This all begs the question, what is it about the dancing baby that makes it so irresistible? And what does it say about us?
Have you heard of the uncanny valley? It's a paradox where the more a computer-generated figure resembles a human, the more we become revolted by it.
The dancing baby is the uncanny valley.
The dancing baby is the uncanny valley.
It's been over 2 decades since Gerard and his team unleashed their monstrosity on the world. Does he regret it?
Yes. 100%.
The main difficulties of working with any vulnerable or fragile work of cultural heritage is the respect you have to have for that object. Technology is at a point right now where we can record the surface of an object down to fractions of a millimeter, and it's through this kind of understanding that allows you to communicate across time and across cultures. The task of heritage protection and preservation is a real challenge. The mission of Factum Foundation is to record cultural heritage. So in the event that there's a disaster or an accident, we have the data to know what was there exactly as it is. We're pioneering a number of methods to return that information into the physical world. We're doing CNC milling, we're doing 3D printing, but we're trying to go beyond that. A facsimile of the Borgherini Chapel, the facsimile of the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings, an exact facsimile of Veronese's wedding at Cana. The biggest project that's going on at the moment is an exact facsimile of the tomb of Seti I, which will be given to the people of Egypt as soon as it's finished. 200 years ago, the concern was not one of preservation. The concern was one of Indiana Jones and discovery and excitement and cultural acquisitions. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings lasted successfully for 3,500 years. But since they've been visited, they start to decline and decay rapidly. I think the facsimile is opening up a whole new level of possibility for display, preservation, conservation, restoration, communication, dissemination of what's important about these objects. If only we can preserve it like it is and document it and hand it on to future generations, then there's hope.